Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the DQRBA live stream, and we're here in Dacheng. And my name is Mr. Jardine. I am the first language English teacher, and I teach IGCSE first language English. Today, I thought I would cover an exam question that is often quite difficult for students. If you are students and you're watching and you do first language English, you might recognize this question, writer's effect. So I thought I would give a bit of a rundown of what is this question, why do we do it, what are some of the ways we need to think about it. And then I also have a past paper that we can work through to try and understand how we can apply our thinking to this. So, without further ado, let's get going. Work down here. So the first thing I like to cover with my students is the why. Why do we do a question like this? What is the purpose of trying to understand why writers make choices? And I boil it down to two main points, and this is about fostering a high-level cognitive thinking. So language is an important tool in our ability to think. We use language to think, and so by deepening our understanding of language and how it's used, we can deepen our own thinking ability. And then the other important part for language learners is to cultivate, which means to grow, to cultivate critical readers who are able to engage with what they are reading and think about it and apply it to their own situation or to learn more from what they are reading. And ultimately also sophisticated writers. The writer's effect question requires us to engage with writing that is at quite a high level. That's the author or the author of that text is a great writer, and so we are looking at ways in which good writers do something, and by doing that we can improve our own writing as well. So now that we've covered the why, let's have a look at what this question is exactly. Let's try and understand what are the expectations for us. And there are three main things which the question is trying to get us to engage with: that we can analyze, that we can understand, and that we can explain. What are we analyzing? We need to analyze how the writer uses language. This can be quite tricky to understand for many learners who English is their second language, but they are doing a first language English course. What is meant by language? And we will have a look at this a little bit later and try and understand what this question means by how the writer uses language. Okay, so we want to analyze how the writer uses language to create specific effects, to create some sort of feeling or a certain atmosphere around the message that they are trying to tell us about. And then also we are trying to understand that the word choice is deliberate and purposeful. And this is something I like to drive home with my students, is that great writers are not just putting words on a page. They are thinking about the words that they are choosing to try and have nuance, slight differences in exactly what they are trying to say, that it will have a greater impact on us, the reader, and therefore their message will be stronger and they'll be able to get across their point more succinctly. And the last thing we need to do is explain the connection between a linguistic choice, like a word choice, and its impact on the reader. So we then need to and this is really what we're doing in the question, is to be able to extract something that the writer has done, and then to be able to explain how, because the writer has done this, it is having an effect on us, the reader, and to be able to explain what that effect is, how that choice affects us, the reader. So let's have a look at an exam question. This is from a past paper, and recently my students did this question in their major 1, and I'll read through it, and then we will get into some of the details about what exactly this question means, so that we are able to answer it better. So the question reads, it says, reread paragraphs 1 and 13. Okay, already that they've said reread implies that we have read this text already in the exam. We sat down at the beginning of the exam and we've read the 3 texts that come with the exam. And now that we get to this question, which is the second last question, we need to go back and reread those paragraphs. It's also to understand that these paragraphs do not exist in isolation. They are part of a larger text. In this case, the text was generally about a person's visit to a scientific base camp in Antarctica. And part of the gist of the article was about global warming and the work that the scientists do there. It wasn't all about global warming, but that was the general gist of the article. These 2 paragraphs never mention global warming, and so we need to be careful that we don't see them in isolation, that the paragraphs themselves actually do also are part of this bigger piece of writing, that they are related to global warming in some sense. So reread paragraphs 1 and 13. Paragraph 1 begins, and it gives you the beginning of the paragraph, base emitted. And then it tells us, it says, begins base emitted and is about the narrator's first impressions of the base station in Antarctica. So it tells us what this paragraph is about. It tells us the narrator, the journalist in this case, in this paragraph gives their first impressions, what they first thought about their visit to this base in Antarctica. And then paragraph 13 begins around us and is about the arrival of winter in Antarctica. So it's the last paragraph of the text, and a good way to wrap up the text is to have this very brutal winter of Antarctica just beginning, and kind of many people leave Antarctica at that time because of the conditions, and so it's a good place to end off the text as well. It is important when answering this question that we stick to the paragraphs that the question wants us to talk about. It is quite common that students find examples from other paragraphs, and I always remind them that you can do great work, but if you are finding something in paragraph 4 that you thought was really good writing, you still won't get any marks. All right, you need to stick to the requirements of the question, paragraph 1 and paragraph 13. And then the question itself, and I have another slide which we can look at. This is a little bit bigger. So it says, explain how the writer uses language to convey meaning and to create effect in these paragraphs. Choose 3 examples of words or phrases from each paragraph. We have 2 paragraphs. We need 3 examples from each, and that means we'll have six examples in total. And we need to choose these 3 examples from each paragraph to support our answer. We cannot just write and just say, this is what I think is happening, and this is how it feels, and we have to always be referring back to the paragraph, back to the words and the phrases that that the writer has chosen, and be using those as the basis for our analysis and our explanation. And then the last sentence says, your choices should include the use of imagery. Okay, again, a very broad category, this idea of imagery. So I wanted to have a closer look at this question and break it down into some individual parts, because some of these things, we've spoken about how language, what do they mean by language? Okay, and create effect. What does it mean to create effect? And this idea of imagery as well. What exactly is imagery? So I'm going to break down this question a little bit before we get into analyzing some of the examples that we can find in this text. So our first one says language to convey meaning. And to do a bit of a thought experiment here, I asked my students to consider two aspects, two ways of how we convey meaning, convey to give meaning or to pass along meaning. And the two main ways I want us to think about it is that meaning can be gleaned from the basic information. If we say a tree is green, then it's pretty plain what we are saying. We're saying that a tree has the color, is the color green. And that's just basic information. But for the purpose of answering this question, that is not going to be very helpful to us, the basic information that is passed along. And the second part is the more important way. And here I say the way in which information is presented. And this is very much what they mean by language, right? The way in which information is presented. How they have written about this information, rather than what exactly the information is. And a way to think about it is, you might have a historical event. And recently, I used this example with my class. There was a movie released in China, 731, which is based around an historical event. And this event can be shown in a history book or in a movie. Okay, both the history book and the movie might contain the same information, right? They're both about the same event. But the way in which they are presented, the way in which that information is presented is quite different, right? The movie has a purpose to entertain us through either being quite gory or working on our excitement or our anxiety about things. Whereas the history book is going to just lay out the facts of what happened, when did it happen, how many people did it happen to, who was responsible, who was involved. It's more cut and dry about just here is the information. The movie has to think about how that information is presented. Okay? And this is mostly done through language, right? The history books might use a lot of, for example, passive voice constructions, where they are not maybe ascribing the action to anyone, but telling us about something that happened to people. Okay, whereas in the movie, the dialogue, how people talk to one another during the movie, is created in such a way as to have an effect on us. Okay, so the history book uses certain language to remove the emotion, and the movie uses certain language, especially through dialogue, to include the emotion. It's not only the dialogue, though. Movies also make lots of other choices. When you create a movie, there are lots of things you can think about in terms of the lighting. Is it always dark? Is there a bright light from below that's causing a shadow? Is there a filter on the lens? Okay, is there like a color filter? This is a choice that was made in Batman. I think a lot of the scenes with the Joker were all in green, and scenes with Batman, I think, had a more blue tinge. And we're not always aware of this when we're watching the movie, but it has an effect on us. Colors have an effect on us, as language has an effect on us. Right, so to look closer at what exactly is this language that is being used, what do we need to be on the lookout for? I've got three main things that I like my students to look at. Okay, this is the language continued. Three main things I want them to look at. The word choice. Be aware of, again, that the writer has chosen specific words to try and get across a message. And we need to become aware of why choosing this word as opposed to another word has more of an effect. What are the connotations? What is the symbolism of this word? How is this word used in first language scenarios? How did Shakespeare use the word? It always goes back to Shakespeare. And become aware of the word choice. And we will look at some examples of this just now. The next thing to be aware about is sentence construction. Right? And I'd like to break this down into three parts. The first part is syntax. And I always like to refer to Yoda from Star Wars. Yoda speaks in a very particular syntax. The force strong in him is. Okay, often the verbs in his syntax are moved to the end. And this is a choice made by the writers of the script, the dialogue, that it would give a kind of mysticism, a kind of strangeness to the character of Yoda. If Yoda just spoke and said, the force is strong within him, it removes some of that character of Yoda. So syntax. And we can also think about things like active and passive voice. But generally, I find that with my students, this is something that's a little bit more difficult to identify particular syntax usage within context. Right? The two things that I think are a little bit easier to deal with is punctuation. Right? And punctuation is often ignored, but is a very important part of how writers create a certain feeling about things. All right. And we can think about this in two ways. Is there a lot of punctuation, or is there no punctuation? Okay. If we go to the two extremes of the spectrum, we can then try to understand how this might have an effect. Obviously, these are context specific, but usually when there is a lot of punctuation, it means that the rhythm of what is being said is being broken up. And this might relate to what they are talking about, the actual information. If we are wanting to show a student sitting in class who is very confused and unsure about what they are doing, and they're trying to do their homework, having a lot of punctuation, a lot of commas to break up the actions and to break up what's happening kind of adds to this uneasiness, this student not understanding, being stuck, stopping and thinking. So punctuation is good, is a good thing to think about. The lack of punctuation. Recently, we read in class a paragraph about a fireworks show in Dubai, and there, in that one of the sentences there, instead of using conjunctions, they use semicolons. And it was to show this kind of these fireworks all going off constantly, lots of fireworks all at once. And the choice not to use a comma and a conjunction, and then the next thing, and a comma and a conjunction, and the next thing, gave more rhythm. As we know, with fireworks shows, there's a kind of rhythm to it. So the punctuation usage itself is adding to the imagery, is adding to the overall feel of this thing that they were discussing. Okay, and then Another thing we need to be aware of is the types of sentences. Okay, and there are three main types, and the fourth one: simple sentences, compound sentences, which are two simple sentences joined together using a coordinating conjunction, and then our complex sentences, which include other clauses, which often have subordinating conjunctions or might have some participle phrases and things like that in it. Okay, and then we have compound complex sentence, a joining of compound sentences and complex sentences. All right, and again, it's context specific. And to go back to that example of the fireworks display in Dubai, that paragraph started off with three simple sentences when they are describing just the fireworks display. And I explained to my students that it mimicked, it mirrored, it was trying to be like the fireworks display itself, of one simple sentence, like the first firework, pow, and then another simple sentence, another firework, pow, and then another simple sentence, pow, and then it was that big sentence with all the semicolons in it, and that was like the peak of the fireworks display. Lots of fireworks, pow, 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 pow. So this is a choice by the writer. They're thinking about how do fireworks displays happen, and all fireworks displays work like this. They start slowly, and then they gain momentum, and then they have a peak, and then they level off as well. And the paragraph also did do that. It had it in a compound sentence, and then it went back into simple sentences. So it had a few simple sentences, a compound complex sentence, then a compound sentence, then a final two simple sentences. So the types of sentences used by the writer was adding to the effect on us, the reader. We gained momentum in that middle sentence. At the first ones, we had this slow bit by bit, and then this gaining of momentum just through the choice of sentences. And then we have imagery. Okay, and I will come back to imagery because it is an essential part of this task, and we'll spend some time talking just about imagery just now. All right, so when we're talking about the language, how does the writer use language to convey meaning? We want you to consider these things. Okay, these are the main things that you should be considering. How does the writer use language to convey meaning, to create an effect? Okay, so we get to this create an effect. And again, it's quite an abstract idea. It can be quite hard for students to understand what is an effect, or what do you mean by an effect? Okay, so there are three main ways. They are still abstract, and in class we practice this throughout the year. We do many examples of these to try and get a better understanding of different effects that writers create. And the more you become aware of it, the more you practice it, the easier it is to identify when you get into that CIE exam. So the three ways I like to explain it to my students is first to create a feeling in the reader. Okay, words have power. Okay, we know this. Words can be rude, they can be polite, they can be loving. So words have a power within themselves, and we need to identify what that power is. What feeling is it creating for us? Okay, we can be embarrassed to say certain words to people. You might be embarrassed to say to your friend, "Oh, I love you. You're such a great friend," because we know that by saying "I love you," it holds meaning. It has a feeling attached to it. So we struggle sometimes to maybe say these things because of the power of that word. Right. So we need to try and identify what is the feeling that these language choices are creating for us, the reader, when we read them. All right. I'll skip to the third one, and then we'll come back to the second one. Also about creating an atmosphere. So the feeling around us, the feeling it creates in us, but also the atmosphere it creates around this thing that they're describing. Are they trying to create an atmosphere of this being very disturbing or very peaceful, or this thing that they are describing? What is the atmosphere around it? What is the tone and atmosphere by which they are presenting it to us? And then to the middle one, right? And in particular, I want to focus on this word, a lens. Okay, I've already spoken about movies and cameras, right? Because we are words obviously are they are like a lens as well. We can look through a word to try to get to a deeper meaning, to understand something beyond the word. The word itself is not always the whole meaning that is contained within it. So when we are talking about creating an effect, it is to create a lens. The language choices are to create a lens, a way of seeing, by which to see the situation or character, how we understand what this character is like. Okay, and again, to use the example of Batman, the green tinge for the Joker, the dark blue tinge for Batman. That creates within us an understanding of these characters. Okay, the green maybe for many people might remind them of, vomit or rotting things. It's not a nice green. It's not like the green of trees. It's a bad green, which is why the Joker is shown as it. The dark blue, well, we know Batman's a complex character. We're not sure whether he is the good guy or the bad guy, which is part of why he's such a relatable character. He's not just a hero. He is, as with many heroes, is a complex hero, is a flawed individual. He has character flaws within him. So the dark blue is calming. We like blue, but the darkness of it, implying that side to him, that time just as the sun has set and it's not quite fully night, but it's dark. And us being close to Halloween, we know that's when all the ghosts and the werewolves and all the ghouls come out during that time of dark blue. Right. So these are the things I try to get across to my students about what is this idea of creating an effect. Right. Then in the question, it made a specific reference to imagery. It made a very specific reference to that your examples should include imagery. The question is saying you should use him, you should be aware of imagery, and it should be one of your examples. So you need to be very aware of what do we mean by imagery in when we are talking about language. Okay, and the most important thing to be aware of is that is the five senses. Right, the five senses are the way in which we humans experience the world. If we do not have any feeling, if we do not have any hearing, sight, smell, taste, then we kind of don't know that there is a world around us, right? When the wind blows and we feel it and our hairs stand up on our arms and we get a certain feeling, it might, take you back to, I remember that cold day many years ago. That is the way in which we experience the world, right? We smell some good food, and maybe when you go off to university, you smell a good dinner being cooked somewhere, and you think of your mom's home cooked meal. You hear a song that you like, and it takes you back to a moment with your friends. Okay, and so these are very important. Okay, to give them the more official names, our visual imagery, our sight imagery, visual, our auditory, our hearing imagery, tactile imagery, the touch of things, and we can describe. We use words like rough or bumpy. These help us to describe things. So it's tactile imagery. The olfactory, something smelly, something you can smell a sweet perfume or something like that. Again, we use this in writing. And our gustatory, our taste, the gustatory imagery. It tasted, I bit into a biscuit and it tasted burnt, okay, or whatever it might be. So first and foremost, this is the most important part that students need to understand. Okay, there is figurative language, right? And we do cover, for the most part, we are concerned with comparisons. There's lots of figurative language, but the big ones for us are our metaphor, our simile, and our personification, our different kinds of comparisons. They are important. It is good to get to know them. It is good to have a solid foundation of understanding these things, because some of this imagery you come across in the exam will be a metaphor, will be a simile, will be some form of personification. And being practiced in analyzing these things will help you. But, Cambridge is very clear on this. You are not required in this question, you are not required to refer to any metaphor, simile, and personification. And I often, especially in the early in the year when we start covering this question, I encourage my students to forget all about these. Don't worry about these, because they can often feel like when you are answering the question, if I say it's a metaphor, I should get some marks for saying it's a metaphor, for identifying it correctly. And so they think that by identifying these things, they are doing analysis, they are explaining, and they're not. They're not doing what is required of the question. So I often, for the purpose of doing this question, ask students to not think about these at all in terms of when you are writing something down. Do not tell me it's a metaphor. Do not tell me it's a simile. Do not tell me it's personification. Explain what is happening, what is going on in the sentence or this example that you are using. All right. So don't get too caught up in this figurative language and the terminology that we use for it. Okay, it's good to have a good foundation in understanding these things, being able to spot them and analyze them all the time, but it is not part of this question. This is what you want to have a better grip on. Okay, and without this, you can't really do this well either. All right, so this is the foundation of our imagery. 5 senses. So that is our question, and that is the breakdown of the question, right? And a reminder of the exam question that we are covering. Paragraph 1 to 13. Right, so the next thing I want to do is to have a look at paragraph 1, right, and to start looking at some of the examples from it, and do some analysis, right? We will not get to a written example ultimately, but we will explore some of what is happening in this paragraph, and the word choices and so on. All right, so this is paragraph 1, and I'll read it out for us, and then we'll have a look at the examples. Bass emitted a hushed grandeur, as if a vault door had been closed. All noise guarded fiercely behind it. A gunshot-like crack echoed through the air, an iceberg rotating. Then a roar like a distant waterfall as another chunk of ice shelf collapsed into the bay. Rough squawks of skuas were magnified through the telescope of empty, dry air. There were no smells of soil, trees, nor grass, only the scent of Antarctica, like 2 stones rubbed together. Flint. So that is our paragraph. And in a lesson, I might have a few students read it. Okay, the language and the imagery here is challenging for our students. This is a question designed to challenge native speakers of English. Okay, so it is always challenging for any Chinese student who's enrolled in this course. The texts are difficult, and so reading them carefully, taking your time is important. Okay, don't let reading become mechanical. We can all identify words. If you have a good phonics foundation, you can even sound out words that you don't even know what the meaning of. You've never seen it before, but you can sound out. Reading can become very mechanical to many humans. And if it's mechanical, then it's not you're not being critical. You're not engaging your brain. You're involved in a kind of thoughtless process. Machines don't think, they are mechanical. We don't want to be a machine. We want to engage our brain, we want to engage our thinking, we want to engage our mind and our ideas about this. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples. Now, in this paragraph, you can throw a sticky ball at this paragraph and you will hit an example. Right? Sometimes you get some paragraphs with parts of the paragraph you should not really use that as an example. This paragraph is so there's lots of imagery, there's lots of particular word choices going on here that that you kind of can't miss. You can't get it wrong. Right? So I have lots of examples here, and let's get into that. All right, our first example. Bass emitted a hushed grandeur, as if a vault door had been closed. All right, so two things first about this example. I have my quotation marks, and it's important that students get used to, whenever they are dealing with something from a text, that they use quotation marks. And I have occasionally embarrassingly jumped around the classroom like a bunny rabbit to remind them that we should always use quotation marks. Okay, you want to show the examiner that you know how to do this. Okay, so by quoting, you are just demonstrating, before they're getting into even reading what you've read, you are just showing your examiner you're in control, you know what you're doing. They're a human, this person, and so they're more inclined to think, okay, let's give this a real good read. Let me see what this student had to say. All right, so quotation marks. The second thing to remember, this is not the whole sentence, right? The whole sentence from the original was, as if a vault door had been closed, all noise guarded fiercely behind it. That is the whole sentence. The question said 3 examples of words or phrases, right? And something that students can get wrong sometimes is they take whole sentences and they quote that. And that's not what the question asked you to do. And it's, again, you want to show the examiner you know what you're doing. You want to show them that they should be giving you marks before they even read what you have written, right? So always be aware that do not take too much, okay? And even this example, maybe it is too much, all right? We could have, at this comma, just taken this first part, and just as well, we could have just taken the second part. There's kind of 2 examples in here, all right? But for the purpose of my class, I dealt with them together. All right, so what are we looking for again? We're looking for word choice, okay? And we're looking for sentence construction, and we're looking for imagery, all right? Let's just think about the two main ones, the 2 easier ones to deal with: word choice and imagery, all right? So I always ask my students, which words have seem interesting to you? Which words have you not seen before? Maybe that's always a possibility in an exam for students, that they come across words they have never seen before. All right, so to deal first with some word choices, all right? In particular, there are 2 words here that I really like. So this hushed, and grandeur. Okay, so these are the first. Now that we've got our example, we want to zoom in. We want to use our camera to have a look at some of the specifics within this example to talk about, that we can explain why the writer did this and what effect this is having on us. Okay, so this would be my first 2 things to look at. Now we get into the tricky part. Okay, so we need to understand, what does the word hushed mean? Okay, so This is a word that means silence, quietness. Okay, and that's its basic meaning. Okay, if you look in the dictionary, it will say something about quietness, and we can't just stop there. We also need to think about the context in which this word is more commonly found. Okay, so I ask my students to read broadly because they might then come across this word where it's used in another context. And we often use this word in places like the halls of parliament, where government sits, the hushed halls of parliament, or during religious ceremonies, there was a hushed atmosphere as the priest performed some ritual, or maybe at the crowning of a king, It's not that the crowd is not sitting there in silence. Yes, they are silent, but we often describe them as being hushed. Hushed describes a kind of respectful silence, and not just respect. There's a kind of awe to it. It's awesome, not in the sense of awesome, bro, but in inspiring awe within us, a sense of wonder. Okay, so we need to unpack that in order to get our marks. We need to explain that hushed means silence, but it means a kind of expectant, respectful silence that has a sense of awe or sense of wonder to it, inspiring awe within us. Okay? And then this word grandeur. It's a hushed grandeur. For many of my students, when they come, I've never seen the word grandeur. Have you seen the word grand? Many students have seen the word grand, right? So grand, often it was a grand ceremony, a big. Okay, in most simple terms, it means big. But grandeur, as a word of description, often we use it in one way in which we use it is in describing buildings. Okay, big buildings. We often say a grand building. But we might say the building exuded a sense of grandeur to it. And as soon as we use this, like we're being slightly more fancy and French, then it takes it beyond grand. It's beyond simple bigness. And often buildings like this are the kind of classical, very architectural Baroque buildings, and maybe with columns and lots of carvings, right? So we have this respectful silence and this very fancy and classical kind of grandness. Right? We can use the word grandness. What is this discuss? What is this describing? It's describing the base. That the base itself lets out, it emits this thing, this hushed grandeur, this respectful silence of classical proportions, of like the great Roman Colosseum, right? It's letting out, it's emitting, it's exuding. And so what is it trying to tell us? That the base itself is a space where there are things happening there. Scientists doing scientific experiments, much like priests doing weird rituals with weird chemicals and laboratory. I'm an English teacher, not a science teacher, so it all seems very mysterious to me. But it's implying this kind of, that the base itself is a sacred space. It's very large and classical. It seems bigger than life. It seems very grand, and that it is kind of mysterious with this respectful silence that we give to mysterious things. Right, so that's how we might deal with this part. That's word choice. We're thinking about word choice. This second part, the vault door being closed. Now we're thinking more about imagery. Okay, we can also talk about the word choice of vault. The vaults are specific things, but there's an image here. There's a visual image. The vault. A vault is what a bank has to store all its gold and all our money. It's not its gold; it's our gold and our money, where they store all of that very safely behind a thick door with some mechanism on the front that keeps everything behind it very safe, very secure. Okay, so we need to unpack that. We need to say that the writer is choosing this image of a vault door to describe that the way in which this base is shut is using something much like a vault door, implying that what it is keeping inside of it is something that is worthwhile keeping safe, something that requires protection. Okay, both ascribing value to the thing inside, the science of the work that the scientists are doing. But there are two sides to the door. That's what's on the inside. We have vault doors because of criminals. There's no criminals in Antarctica. There's the weather. Okay, so the other thing that this vault door is doing is it's protecting this brutal outside, the brutal Antarctica, the weather that can, if you're stuck out there, it will kill you. So there's two sides to this. And in your answer, you might want to explore both sides to this to really show the examiner you know what you're doing. Okay, so the image of the vault door giving value to what is inside, and also telling us about the brutality of what is outside. Not the criminals, but Antarctica and its weather. All right, so that's how we can unpack an image like this. All right, let's move on to another example. I'm moving very fast through these. If anyone in the chats does want to ask a question, ask for more information, feel free to ask any questions. I'll be happy to help you understand them deeper. All right, the second part is the second part of the sentence. All noise guarded fiercely behind it. Right, and it very much adds on to this idea of the vault, security, guarded. Okay, but there's a bit more going on in here. We have noise. Okay, so there's noise. It's a bit strange. It says all noise guarded fiercely behind it. And I found this a bit strange because when I think of a vault door, I often think what is behind it is the gold, the inside. But perhaps the way we need to think about this is that behind it is actually implying the outside. That is where the noise is going to be. That is where this wind that can reach hundreds of kilometers and snow blizzards and all the rest, that is where that is all. It's outside. Okay, so I found it a little bit confusing. Okay, teachers are humans. We're not AI, but I'm sure AI would struggle with this area. Okay, so all the noise on the outside is being guarded. It is being guarded. We need to keep it away from us. And this word fiercely, implying again that it's not just normal kind of noise. It's not some traffic or some birds outside or somebody talking outside your door. It is a fierce kind of noise that requires a fierce kind of guarding. Okay, that there's a violence there. It's a very violent noise. Okay. Also, we can think about the different choices of, why not say sound? Okay. Noise implies a kind of, sound is sound. Okay, it's anything that emits any kind of wave. Noise implies that it is a gross sound, a not nice sound. Okay, a disgusting sound. So fiercely, there's a violence to it. There's a grossness to it as well. Okay, that is being described as noise and not sound. All sound guarded fiercely behind it. Okay, then on to an example that if I was in this exam, I definitely would have used this one. It's a very easy one to deal with. Okay. Here we have a gunshot-like crack echoed through the air. Okay. And immediately, gunshot-like. Okay. That already brings some imagery to mind. Auditory imagery is what we're supposed to be getting. It's a gunshot, but you cannot escape the gun. That will instantly go into all of our minds because of how they're very powerful instruments, guns. Okay, so this is describing the sound of an iceberg outside. Okay. And they describe it as being a gunshot-like crack. What is a gun? A gun is a tool of violence. Okay. It destroys things. So we need to start thinking about that in terms of why is the writer saying that? Why are they describing the iceberg like that? Possibly because the writer is shocked. The journalist, when they heard the sound, it's shocking. It's loud. It's a crack. Very loud sound. Okay. Very sudden. But also that the sound you can hear the violence. Okay. This crack is really, it seems like it is destroying, like something is being destroyed. This is where it's important to understand the broader context of the article, where there was this talk about global warming. Global warming is a destructive process. Okay. So the writer is maybe wanting to add in things like violence and gunshots and destruction because they are wanting to push us, the reader, to understand global warming as being a damaging thing. Okay. They're hiding their message in words like this. Because if they were just like, oh, global warming is the worst and we should all be very upset about it, we know that that can have the opposite effect in messaging. Sometimes that causes people to kind of, I've heard it all before, don't tell me. You give them some nice imagery and people become more receptive to the idea without even knowing that they'll become more receptive to what you're trying to say. Okay? So, gunshot, the violence, the suddenness, the loudness, the destructiveness that comes along with guns. Okay. Crack, onomatopoeic word, crack. It sounds like the thing. Okay. Again, crack implies destruction. If you crack something, if you crack your teeth, you've bitten a nut that's too hard and you've broken your teeth. Okay. There's a breaking that's going on. And then to get very deep, echoed. Okay, the echoing of this. Right, and this again required some very careful reading of the text as a whole to come to an understanding of this word in a deeper sense. We can understand this as being the effects of humans. Global warming is a man-made, is a human-driven phenomenon. We emit greenhouse gases or whatever they might be, and that creates global warming, right? Echoes are like ripples in a pond. If you drop a stone in and you get the ripples, okay? And it is much like the process of CO2 accumulation. During the Industrial Revolution and when we had a huge amount of coal burning and CO2 being let off, this is the start of global warming. And it's kind of like the stone that is being dropped into the water, the quack of the duck that then echoes back, or the gunshot that echoes back. Okay, so there's a kind of the actions of humans have an echo effect. They continue on. They reverberate. There's a memory to them that ultimately results in the breaking down of the ice shelf of Antarctica. Okay, but that requires some very, very, very careful, careful reading and some critical thinking to get to that. And you'll get an A star for just explaining things like gunshot and crack. But do you really want to impress your teacher or your examiner? Being aware of even how a word like this that seems so simple here can have a broader message as well. Okay, we are almost at the end. I will give us one more. I'll give us one more example. It would be the other example I would choose in the exam, and I'll get through it quite quickly because I would have chosen it because it's an easy one. Okay. A roar like a distant waterfall as another chunk of the ice shelf collapsed into the bay. Lots of nice stuff going on here. There's simile here, but let's not worry about the simile. A roar. What roars? Lions roar. Lions are powerful animals. Okay? So there's a power here. Okay? Lions are the king of the jungle. They're a force of nature to be reckoned with. A distant waterfall. Waterfalls, also a force of nature. When you think of this, coming to mind should be Niagara Falls or Victoria Falls or some great waterfall here in China. A waterfall is not a dripping tap. Okay? The dripping tap, I can stuff a bit of material up there and I can stop it. Okay, I can stop the dripping. You cannot stop a waterfall. Waterfalls shape our landscape. They break rocks. They over time erode everything, right? So a word that I would associate with this when answering is like inevitability. We're talking about this ice shelf collapsing, like there's an inevitability. Nobody can stop this, or at least because of where we are with global warming, nobody can stop it. Okay, it is beyond our power to stop. There's also, I asked my students I asked them, would you stand under a waterfall? Okay, maybe some of them would, a nice waterfall, but a big waterfall, you can't stand under a very large, one of the great waterfalls of the world. It is powerful. Power. Okay. Forces of nature. This is a force of nature as well, this ice shelf. Two more words I would want to deal with. Chunk. Why not say piece? If we say piece, if I have a piece of chocolate, it's a small little bit of chocolate. If I have a chunk of chocolate, I'm really enjoying my chocolate. I'm having a good amount of chocolate. Okay, so the word chunk here implies a bigger, a more substantial piece of the ice. Okay, and then collapse. When do we collapse? Okay, usually on a Friday night is when I collapse after a long week. But marathon runners at the end of a race, they collapse. It implies a kind of tiredness, right? You collapse when you are tired. The bridge collapses when the materials in the bridge have reached their stress points. The sun and the elements have led them to a point of brittleness, right? So this word implies that, it's almost like us, the humans, through our actions of global warming, are tiring out the ice shelf. We are making it tired, and it is collapsing, like it's had enough. Okay, it cannot withstand, it cannot hold itself together anymore. Okay, and yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it off for today. I hope everyone who tuned in got a bit of an idea of how this question works, and I will see you again, I think, in a month or so. We'll cover something else. Last time we did a book club. This time we've done an exam question. I don't know what I'll do next time. We'll have to see what else we can cover for first language English, how I can challenge some of you more advanced English speakers out there. All right, I hope everyone learned something, and I enjoyed my time discussing it with you. I always enjoyed discussing English. Yeah. Have a good day. Goodbye.